I'm really fascinated by all three talks, and I think they raise a number of very significant questions. So I was planning to say it later, but since Elin drew attention to the question of small language sustainability and small language protection, I would like to ask opinion of all of you. So a lot of monolingual policies in education or in societies are motivated by understanding or belief that if this is not the place where we cherish this language and protect it and develop it, then where else? So, and this is a challenge, especially for small languages, especially for Estonia, for Finland, although you're larger, but still your Finnish language is specific and unique enough for Iceland especially. At the same time, our world is increasingly multilingual, and we cannot just blindly close our eyes and say that we protect our language and we ignore multilingualism of the global world, because by that we actually clip our wings or wings of our children if they do not grow up in understanding of the value of multilingualism, or if they grow up without the multilingual skills. So is there a way to balance these two realities? Who wants to start?
Well,
is there an answer?
I can start with what I think is that, first of all, Icelandic is my language, and I would not like to see it die, and that is a possibility. You know, that is talked about more and more. But what I have been saying in Iceland about this is that making sure Icelandic is the language of the country. If you want to have a job other than working at the gas station or in a restaurant, you do have to know Icelandic. So if you don't know it, you limit your opportunities. And I think that making sure that L2 speakers, children, that they learn Icelandic, it is not taking something away from them. It is making them capable of having equal opportunities in the country where they plan to live. And that does not mean that they cannot continue to speak their own languages. And the policy in Iceland is very supportive of home languages to the detriment of Icelandic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Nayr?
I think multilingualism is also context dependent, isn't it? And I think in this, I think we need to look at the context when we're looking at language policy, when you're looking at which languages you're going to learn and which languages you're going to support. And I think in any kind of context where you're a newly arrived individual in a particular context, I think it is important to learn that language. So it is important to learn Icelandic in Iceland or Norwegian in Norway. And from a multilingual perspective, that's actually a very positive thing, because developing multilingualism means that you're adding another bow or another string to your bow, if you want to say that. So I think it's great. So I think this is an example of going to the other extreme, where you're so open to other languages that you're not actually supporting your own language.
Yes.
And it's interesting to see as well that the L2 students were actually a lot more positive about learning Icelandic and understood the need for learning Icelandic, as opposed to the the other individual. So I think it is context dependent, but I think the language of the context is an important language in a multilingual's repertoire.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
There's a lot to say about this topic, of course, but I would perhaps start with what are the resources for these kids? What is the teacher education? What does it look like? Are there enough resources and knowledge and further education for in-service teachers? So now it's kind of it feels like an individual problem, actually, that, okay, they don't know enough, so that's why they are lacking certain knowledge, certain skills, and they're behind those who are perhaps the native speakers. And I hear these PISA results, and of course in Finland it has its own PISA heaven, but there have been lower results in Swedish medium schools, and you know what? They are blaming bilinguals for these lower results. And I would like to ask, what are the pedagogical activities over there? And how are these languages in the lives of schools? And how is kids' multilingualism used? Not just acknowledge that, okay, nice, you speak Arabic and French, but how is it used in order to make them to progress? And these types of attempts have been in various countries. There's a saying that even dead things left unused die. So I'd like to ask that do we really want to leave certain languages dead? In Finland, for example, there's a growing worriness about Finnish, not about Swedish.
Not Sami, Finnish?
Sami is a special case, and being an indigenous, but in these, when talking about English as an elephant in the room, it's always threatening Finnish, but not Swedish. Swedish is put aside in these conversations and debates. So I call it as a new nationalism, actually.
So, was there a question to Elin?
Well, if I do pick up on what you said about what's being done in Iceland, what's being done is highly inconsistent because this thing just happened without anybody having expected it. And so people were not, at the beginning, we had no specifically trained teachers to deal with this. So it was kind of the Wild West. But another thing also is that both in Iceland and Quebec, the number of other languages is about 150. So some of those languages, there's a considerable community, like Polish speakers they're the largest immigrant group. So you can do something, there's a Polish school, etc. For some of the communities, there is nothing. So what in the positive view of home languages is to the point in Iceland that people are being told, and you can find this in policy documents, they're being told that if the child doesn't learn to speak, to read in their home language, in their mother tongue, which is so-called rather than heritage language over there, then they will never learn to read. And there are people who are the only family from certain countries who are noticed that they're not capable of teaching their child their own language to that point, and they are just devastated. So there is, and there is need for a frank discussion of really what is possible.
I think, can I just say, I also think there's a lot of research taking place into bilingualism, into multilingualism, into how the brain manages languages, into how the individual manages languages, and I think we really need that to come out and out into the public. I think parents need training. Parents need to understand how languages function. Teachers need a lot more training in how to manage the different linguistic resources in the classroom. So there's a lack of understanding of how that functions. I mean, it could be because we just tend to look at language and language policies very monolingually. It could be just simply because we're not disseminating these, we're not informing the public of how it actually functions and all the different resources and the different strategies and techniques that you can use in the classroom to help manage the different languages.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think we need to also acknowledge that you have limited time and you need a certain number of waking hours to learn a language. And the more you try to learn many of them at the same time, the more you spread yourself thin. And there may be choices to make. So people, families, or schools may need to focus, may need to deliberately decide that you're going to learn your languages in sequence, or that you're going to learn one of them at least that becomes your strongest, and a number of other ones in the rest of your time. You cannot learn 4 or 5 languages and speak all of them to age-appropriate levels that allow you to get an education. You just don't have time for that. And I think we know that from quite a bit of research.
I have such great discussions that I don't need to ask questions. Please.
I'd like to also point out that when we are talking about home languages, actually it creates a space for using languages only at home. So it has its own limited domain. And that's a bit also, it's one aspect of it. And especially when I'm also thinking about general attitudes and the language climate in countries like Finland, for example. In the late 80s, in early 90s, if you were in public places and a Russian speaker, it was better to whisper in public places. Not to annoy him.
Yeah.
But now it's Arabic.
Okay.
So Arabic is a no-go language. And what does it do to families and the mental state of these kids? That's my question.
I have one specific question for Elin. Based on your experience, is there any concrete specific recommendation on how to avoid methodologically in a multilinguistic educational context to avoid this spreading thing in trying to obtain several different languages at the same time? Because as they say, there are various ways of being bilingual or trilingual, but there are some ways where you become more efficient in actually succeeding.
So there are two things that are being tried in Iceland. One of them is there's a strong push towards having mother tongues in the schools. So taking part of the school day and teaching them in the mother tongue. That is very difficult to do in all 150 languages. The other one is to make the school very strongly Icelandic speaking. The school day is quite short in Iceland, and to try to add more extracurricular activities that are in Icelandic to try to make Icelandic a strong language. Okay. So these are two things that are being proposed.
Thank you. I would like to bring one more elephant in the room, and it is identity or cultural identity. So if we speak about language, language is a very significant element of cultural identity. So if people are multilingual, what are the links between their multilingual identity and their multicultural identity? And as I understand, a lot of opposition from the public towards multilingualism is a perception that if I become bilingual, I become less of somebody in one of my ethnic belonging. If I am an Estonian speaking English, I'm less of an Estonian. If I'm a Russian speaking Estonian or learning in Russian, I'm less of a Russian. But how to overcome this fear of cultural threat from education system or from people coming into the country, what would be the arguments of overcoming it and actually proving that it is enriching, or how to make sure that it is enriching and that those fears do not realize?
Okay, that's very complex. I'm not sure
we have 7 seconds to
that
respond.
Question, but I would just like to first say that because of how individuals pick up languages and learn languages today, I'm not sure we can really link a language identity to a culture, to a cultural identity. The link isn't as obvious as that. So I was brought up in South Africa. I've got English. Now, what is my English identity? It's not British. It's not American. So we need to deconnect, I think, that strong link from language and identity, but at the same time we still need to maintain it, and that's why it's so complex, because if I do want to learn my mother tongue, then that strong identity link is there. So I think that this conversation is much more complex than just simply saying that, yes no. It's a yes or no situation. It's very, very much also a choice of the individual and how they actually want to use their languages and how they want to present their languages at that particular moment in time, for example. So it's a very difficult discourse, but it's a very easy discourse that politicians use against or for their own purposes. And that is the unfortunate thing about language and identity.
It creates a certain non-belongingness. And it also has an institutional suspicion towards multilingual people, as if they wouldn't be loyal to their country, which is really worrisome. And I once asked a colleague of mine who said that, yeah, we Irish people, we also have ethnicity. And I said, well, what's your ethnicity coming from Northern Ireland? I said, I'm ethnically Catholic. So it's not always about language, and it's always about language, how we speak about these identities and how we treat each other, and that's it.
I would just like to say to that, I find that in a number of talks it's been assumed that the view of multilingualism is negative, that people are scared of it. In Iceland, I can't see that view. In Quebec, I really do not see that view. Allophones are highly trilingual. And I have always been an immigrant almost all my life. My children are. In the circles that I move, I just do not see this. I don't think everybody is scared of this. Really.
And yet some people are.
Yeah, but many people are not. So we can't always assume also that's always the case.
There are different multilingualisms.
Okay. I would love to invite some more questions, but we are already like 5. Can we take one from there? One, okay. So.
Thank you so much for this question. I'm Mayank from ISEC. And I want to make sure that the whole panel session or discussion that we had, at least we as delegates, we can at least bring back something to our organization or influence. So I wanted to know, maybe like not now, after 10 years, I'm sure that I will be able to contribute something for the humanity. And this integration conference maybe adds certain touch points that I can start preparing now, and after 10 years, I'll be able to do something. And similarly, some of my friends can do it. So question here is, as Sanita in the previous session, she mentioned that humankind, we need language for survival. So survival to cooperation, communication is a touch point that where we bring the language. Now question comes here that after globalization, what we can do, maybe individually or as a part of organizations, what we can do to maintain optimum balance in the cost and benefit for multilingualism. So I don't know what I can do to maintain the right, because I don't even know what is the right thing.
Okay.
So I want to educate myself.
So the question is, what is the best we can do to maintain the balance between multilingualism or within multilingualism in the globalized society? Yes?
Okay. Perhaps we need to look at each individual context and ensure that we are doing the right thing for that particular context and the people in that particular context, and not think that we're going to use the same approaches across the board, because that just doesn't work.
Okay.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that what is lacking in the Icelandic context is the right type of opportunity. It's like the making some policy and trying to make sure that people can learn all the languages that they need in their life, and that they can go about it in a way that gives them good functional skill.
Okay.
I've been thinking that instead of talking about what kind of target levels people would have in order to learn languages, I would ask every one of us how much are we doing in order to enhance well-being. So is language education actually done in order to make people feeling well? And that would be a perhaps new step towards better pedagogies as well, policies.
If I may, I would also perhaps add a question of respect. Each language has a story behind it. It has a group of people behind it. So respecting this language and embracing it would also help us to keep this balance between being all international, but also respecting the local. Okay, so perhaps that's it. Thank you. Thank you very much for discussion. Thank you.